Well, welcome to our meeting today with Micro Giants. Today we've got, as you'll see here in just a few minutes after this first part of the presentation, we've got John Mills and JP Beal with us again, people that you know from prior videos if you've been on them. Both of them entrepreneurs, skilled business people, and have been involved with the Microgiants project for years and years. So what we're going to talk about today is a kind of a simple subject, which was really caused, I did this because of something that happened last week, and I've just been thinking about how stupid it is, and it has to do with when you're trying to do something for a customer that is cool or better, IT related, communication related, how many times do you really make somebody mad instead of actually helping your customer enjoy the experience? So I started thinking a little bit about that and put together just a few comments about how to kill your brand. And so we're going to go through that starting right now, and then we'll break over to the panel. And so all I have to do is figure out how to move this forward. Well, here we go. So first of all, let's just talk about, well, what are some of the ways you can hurt your brand? And in my research, I found about 10 or 12 areas with sub areas and explanations. So you can imagine it's almost an infinite amount of things you can do to kind of screw things up. But I broke them down for today's discussion to a few that I thought were a little bit more important. First of all, you can overprice your product, obviously, and that has to do with value. And if people are not sure that the price is worth the value, you're going to have them move over to another product. You're going to lose their business potentially. Sometimes you can get away with it a couple of times, but once they feel like they're not getting that value or what they think the market is for your product, you're going to end up losing a customer. So of course, that's a bad way to hurt your brand. Another is poor customer service. We're going to dig into this just a little bit more in a few minutes. But obviously, if your customer service is really poor and you can't service the product, that leaves a bad taste in people's mouth. And we'll kind of settle on that. I've got a couple of examples. The product quality obviously has to be maintained or increase. You saw the backlash when people downgraded quality actually based on quantity with the repricing of goods in smaller packages, and the press was all over that during COVID, claiming that they were gouging, et cetera. And that was a big sort of public media outcry anyway. And of course, that kind of does put you in disfavor. You're used to buying 8 ounces for $1.99, and suddenly you find you're getting 6.5 ounces for $1.99. That is potentially, not only does it hit with this inconsistent branding, but it's confusing messages, and in a way, it's not false advertising per se, but it is some kind of a false presentation in my mind. The product has to have a clear value proposition, and when it's not clear, then you end up having people just question what this brand is all about. If it's a technical product and you're not getting the kind of support that you need, that can really put people in a bad way. I've mentioned before, and I'm still having issues with my Wi-Fi sprinkling system, keeping its connectivity going, having problems with one dropping off and then another, then it works and then it doesn't work. It's very sporadic, and just having to get on the phone again. And of course, not having clear directions on how to do troubleshooting, because you're using your phone to work the app, and then you need, you're standing in the yard, you need to use your phone in order to be able to look up the help stuff, and now you're switching back and forth, and just kind of a mess. It's not a really good supportive way, even though the product is really good. We mentioned inconsistent quality. Neglecting customer feedback. I mean, when customer feedback is the way you find out about these things, and if you don't pay any attention to it or don't give them a venue to give you feedback, now you're hurting your brand. And that in this electronic era, that is just everywhere. It is, it's a little better in some ways than it used to be when they're careful about it and when they have a pop-up screen ask you after you're done if you'll give feedback. That's nice. Do they ever answer? Not really. Do they look at it? Who knows? Maybe they're just trying to make you think that they care. So, are they really handling this in an absolutely great way? Not so much. And each one of these things causes people to just have the brand erode just a little bit and a little bit and a little bit until you're finally to the point where you go, I think I'll look for something else. Maybe somebody else has better pricing, better value, better service, etc. Inconsistent branding, when people change their brands too often. That's a real common problem among very small businesses that just simply need to change their logo. And I'll tell you, that can have devastating feedback. Sometimes it doesn't need to be changed because the brand is good and the imagery is good and familiar. That changing causes confusing messages because every brand, every logo looks a little bit different anyway. And then, of course, false advertising, as I mentioned, is something that really sticks in people's craw, and that's happening on so many levels today. You go onto Pinterest, for instance, and you take a look at an image, and that image is a lamp, and you click on it and you expect to have more information about the lamp. But no, they've taken you to a website that's all about home decor. You can't find the lamp anywhere. That is very confusing, and false advertising, false imagery at the very least. And then, of course, an inadequate digital presence is when you just don't have anything, or when what you have is really poor. So let's talk a little bit about the poor customer service, and let's open this up a little bit. When you have an unclear value proposition, as I mentioned, people just don't know what to think. And so, what is your overall value? We're going to bring up in the last slide. We'll talk about the value diamond, but basically we're talking about a combination of quality and price, service, and support. So, well, let's see, let's just go ahead and switch over to that real fast if I can. Yeah, okay, quality, price, service, and image, excuse me, what we've been talking about, brand. And so what this is just a way to take a look at all of these different pieces. All of the ones that we've just talked about fit very neatly underneath one of these four things and doing a comparison. So in the customer's mind, they're collecting each one of these little teeny bits of data and forming an opinion and comparing you to your competitors. And when you begin to be sort of smaller than the competitors, you've got two of them here that are almost identical, and another one which is a little bit less. That particular product is likely going to win. So let's just talk a little bit about this circumstance that is an example. We talk in general terms about so many things. I'm sorry, this is not working the way it's supposed to. Let me just see if I can run this. I may have to run this a little differently. Okay. The problem with one screen is you can't really do both at the same time. So, okay, I'm just going to have to walk everybody through this. I apologize. I should have tried it on Zoom first. So in this particular case, when you take a look over here, I went down and got some got a new prescription. And I get home, there's no directions. And so here you go. It's like, oh, no problem. Albertsons is going green. So it's like, okay, what does that mean to me? I'm not a green, I'm not a brown, I'm somewhere in between. I'm all good for environmental stuff, but to this means they're trying to make me think they're green by not printing me the information I need. They're not getting points for that. Okay. Then no problem. Just scan the QR code and we'll give you the important information about your medication. Okay, fine. So you go through the process of finding it. Hopefully your scanner works and you end up with this over here. And what you've got is you have to click the disclaimer first. And so in order to be able to start this whole process, you click the disclaimer and now you've got another screen. And then what do you have to do? Well, you can cancel and get out and lose the time you've spent, or you can save a download. Now you've got a big download that is clogging your phone that you're supposed to read. It's like, I'm done. This is not going to get used by me. And so what do you end up with this kind of experience? That's no good. That doesn't make any sense at all. I'm not going there, not happy about it. However, not all is lost, because if you prefer paper, you can notify the pharmacy team. Right. I'm home. I've been home. I'm going to try to get a piece of paper to match this now. So next time I go in, I'll say, sorry, I do not want any of your digital stuff. It just doesn't work. Another example. Sorry, this is not going to work this very well either, but you'll get the idea. Now we have Costco. Here's another example. I get my invoice. Not required to do anything, but if I want to take a look at the QR code, I can. You click on it, bam, here you are. It's one click, and you can show the glasses on your own face. That takes you right to where you are. It is fun. Of course, it's still novel in some respects, but you get to try on all kinds of outrageous glasses. And some of these were much nicer than this particular one, but I thought these were perfect for this example. And so, now what you have is you've got a price. You can scroll through hundreds of frames. You can look at them all on your own. Now they're doing two things. They're satisfying you, and they're also presenting an opportunity to increase their revenue and make you happy at the same time. Huge, huge difference in the way these two things act. So when you've got somebody who has looked at the first example, they're going to find a little disappointment, a little bit of disgust on their face. And it's not going to be particularly, a good experience for your brand. When you also have situations where when you are told you're going to get one thing and you end up getting something a little bit different, you're also going to be disappointed at the very least. And so how do we really talk about this? And we're back to the value diamond. And that is that every single time you have one of these little disappointing service things, your line goes a little bit in, a little bit in, gets a little smaller, and you now are making just a little bit less of an impact on the customer. If your quality goes down, oops, that's misspelled. I didn't notice that. I've looked at this 1,000 times. When your quality goes down, same thing happens. And that is that, you just come down and down and down until you get to the point to where you don't look great. And price has to be compensated in order to deal with these other things. And if your image was never good or you confuse people, you tell the wrong story, and they don't really understand your overall value proposition, then you end up ultimately losing. So, gentlemen, that is just sort of a little prepper on some of the stupid things that we business people do to create, a little bit worse value, and if not actually kill the brand. Too many of these kinds of little faux pas, and there are thousands of them, can really make a brand a laughingstock. And of course, we've talked about them before, brought them up, Budweiser. That label is still a laughingstock. And there are several other brands that have done stuff like this based on social issues. Uh, what a really kind of shallow way to try and create better experience, better value for customers than to make a mistake like that. So, gentlemen, what kinds of issues bug you, or maybe more poignant, what kinds of problems have you had where you devalued your brand and you had to try and restore it, or maybe you haven't restored it?
JP, go have a roll.
You look like you're ready,
Well,
VP.
um, not ready, but maybe almost. I guess, you know, from my standpoint as a fairly young company, although even by now I've been in business a couple years now. Um, I have sort of made those sort of changes to my brand, multiple times up to now. I started off um, with a different name than what I'm under. I'm Old California Botanicals now,
Mhm.
but I started off as L'Orangerie.
Okay.
Um,
Pretty hard to pronounce and or spell or know what that means.
yeah, I mean the
Yeah.
logic behind that was to communicate. I mean, the the logic behind that was to sort of connect it to France, where citrus in Europe is a more premium experience. We have premium citrus here. Um, Also, the story behind that is that in other parts of the world, you're growing this inside an orangery, a greenhouse. You're exactly right, though. People are struggling to pronounce it. It's never a good look to correct your customer on how it's pronounced. So I made that change. Old California Botanicals is a mouthful,
Mhm.
but it communicates what I'm doing also and tries to sort of demonstrate quality through age. And some of our products do go back a very long time. Um, the logo thing is always difficult. I mean, I had to, and this became again something when I commissioned my website. Much of last year, I actually ended up spending sort of getting my website up and running, and I still don't know that it's a finished thing. But I mean, the options available to me were to commission, say, like a designer through Upwork or one of those contracting sites online. Um, and sort of that understanding of what the brand is to mean and sort of to convey to the customer is sort of there's a lot that's built in if you're working with someone local versus someone abroad. So I told, this is sort of a funny anecdote about my website. I worked with somebody who was living in Croatia but was from London, and I felt clear communicating, what we were going for, a premium experience. I wanted sort of like Ford logo style font. I mean, this all sounds really simple, stupid. The website I got back from this guy was basically 1960s Haight Ashbury, which,
Okay.
okay, that's a period.
There's a market for that. Yeah.
There is a market for that. I'm not wading into that market at all. And there are people within my category who produce, say, like CBD products. That's not what I'm doing. And
Right.
I'm never going to do that.
Right.
Um, and that's just not the era I'm hearkening to. Eventually, I managed to walk them back and say, okay, look at
By the way,
these
that's a
websites.
dying audience right there, I mean, so,
Willie Nelson's maybe got, another 8 years tops. I don't
yeah.
know.
Yeah, that's
But
right.
yeah, so eventually I managed to say, okay, look, I want my website to look like these Napa wineries go. Um, so that was sort of it's an ongoing thing for me, sort of struggling with like communicating what it is the brand means to me inside my head and should
Yeah.
convey to other people. And working with other people. So I mean, I think that's maybe sort of the anecdote
Yeah.
that comes to
Yeah.
mind there. And I mean, like a premium experience on a website is going to be the fastest turn on or turn off for any potential customer. And so, I mean, it is important to get right, but I had no idea when I picked this up as my 2024 New Year's resolution that it was going to take all of 2024 to even get to like a passable moment, much less, the ongoing.
Yeah. Well, of course, some of that has to do with who you're working with, and there are innumerable people who make a little bit of money in that industry, but are a long ways from professional. And you have to weeding through that is a very difficult thing to do. And in addition to that, while there are a lot of people who are, quote, in marketing, they're not necessarily in communications. And if they're in communications, they're not necessarily in terms of visually, they don't understand the visual impact of markets, let alone the strategic niche marketing that is necessary to be able to fashion visual images to a niche market. And so, and if you're unsure about that, it's hard to explain to somebody what you're trying to do, and they will misinterpret that in some other way.
Yeah.
All you have to do is do a perfect description of what you want on AI and see what you get with that and how many times it's wrong. And you can realize that, communication is a key deal. But and it isn't that the issue though? Communication with the customer, that's what we're trying to do. And and so I hear your struggles and I understand those. They're difficult and you have several different products. So it's not as though you can zero in.
Some of which are still operating on labels that aren't technically correct brand wise.
Yeah.
My lip balm can't fit Old California Botanicals on the label. It's been operating under Old California. My Gill Orange soap doesn't have my brand on it anywhere. It's things I hadn't considered before I ordered, the amount of labels I did. And it's been doing fine.
Yeah.
But I have actually had moments where people have encountered one product someplace and then another product someplace else and not known that it was me.
Right.
And there's no way that people could like link that to a website or link that to social media. And I mean, so it sounds simple, stupid, and maybe this was sort of a simpletonian mistake, but I mean, it does have sort of broad impacts. Product design has to take some of these into account. So that's something I'm working on this year.
Yeah, I mean, it can not only kill your brand, it can kill your company. It's like, well, gee, it took too long to get it going. It's going now, but we got years into this, and people are still uncertain as to what I'm doing and why I'm doing it, et cetera. It's a real problem. There's no doubt about that. No doubt about that. John, I'm sure you've never made any branding mistakes.
Well, I think I have, but I'm actually kind of intrigued to talk about a couple of companies that one of them hasn't made, and to look at them and say, what did they do? And then one that is in the same kind of industry and now doesn't exist. So one of the ones that I think is internationally known and has been known forever is a company called Kodak. And Kodak, of course, was a name, I don't know what the name related to. The name itself doesn't seem to have any sense when it comes to actually photography. But I think if you asked about 80% of the people living in the world, have you ever heard of Kodak? I think you get an affirmative. And in terms of success, that company had an extremely successful career until they filed for bankruptcy in 2012. And so that's an interesting one. If you look at how long they were in business, and they were international and they were in every area. The other one that I want to talk about in opposition to that is IBM. And IBM, started off by making tabulating machines and doing certain things with and then typewriting systems, and they're completely today something that they are not in the beginning. Originally, they're called the Computing Tabulating Recording Company, which actually was a combination of three companies that they brought together to try to make into one. And that was in 1911. And today, they're still going strong, which is well over 100 years long in business. And they're doing in the $60 billion area, and they seem to have migrated past American business to clearly international business, and they've gone from physical machines into electronic machines, and now they have fully migrated into digital and AI. And the name of the company is still the same. So, it begs the question of how come IBM is still growing strong, and people like Kodak now are wrapped up and talked about in hushed tones.
Well, innovation killed Kodak, not the brand.
That's true. I agree with you on
Yeah.
that. But the owners of the brand had some choices they didn't make.
They did, although I just saw a piece on them, and they are making some big inroads today in a very specialty part of photography, and it looks like they're going to come back. They're going to,
That looks like they're going to pick up a piece of it and come back.
yeah.
See, IBM was faced with those same changes.
But they saw them ahead of time and made them quicker. You're right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so did the brand change? Well, I don't know. And then bring up a
So
name from
they're two interesting, I think, comments. First of all, I just looked this up. Eastman liked K, and he wanted something that would have a K and that could be pronounced international.
Well, there you go. And that worked.
Kodak, and he turned it into a brand. And that's an example of it doesn't matter if it means anything. All you have to do is explain your brand. So in this particular case, Kodak was really straightforward. It meant photographic plates, photographic film.
And there's no other name like it. I mean, it was like when you talked about Kodak, you didn't get confused with 20 other lookalikes.
Yeah, of course, they were alone for a few years. Then IBM, on the other hand, International Business Machines, is so generic. It's like it could mean anything to anybody, anytime. So the brand itself, now they did go through a whole branding thing where in the 60s they went from International Business Machines to IBM, and they developed that the lines through the IBM. It was very distinctive, and I can actually say I'm old enough to remember this. And the excitement about the change of the logo was really a national thing, and it was a big deal. And they got a lot of extra press over that at the time. And some people, have said, well, it correlates to the lines that go through the old-fashioned green pinwheel fed paper. And so there's where it came from. Well, really, they went to a big firm in New York, and they got pitched a whole bunch of ideas, and they picked the one that they thought was futuristic and really looked upbeat, and it was going someplace. And it worked. It worked well for many years, and it's still functioning. So I mean, those are a couple of examples of what you do. IBM went through a period where they lost their brand, however. They lost it for some of the reasons we just mentioned. They lost it because when they went through the PC thing, and they changed their policy from always made here to we'll farm some of it out. And oh, by the way, we're going to have somebody else write the software for our IBM PCs. Of course, that was Microsoft. It was MS. It was DOS. And so they really lost a little of their emphasis or their impact. They did do very well with the PC, and they sold who knows how many millions and millions and millions of PCs, and they ultimately dominated Apple. So they killed Apple on the machinery. And that's because they were really fast, because they used outside contractors to build all the pieces. unfortunately, that made it easy to copy, and everybody copied them from Compaq on down, and they're still being copied effectively. It's not any different. They're going to be different, I guess, with the new AI computers. But what they also did at the same time is they went from their mini computing, into their maxi computing, the big iron, as they used to say, and they moved forward on AI themselves with Watson. They moved forward in all kinds of technology and downsized and brought the prices down. And they've recaptured so much of
They
that
stayed
market
with the
today.
same. They did stay with the same brand. They changed
Yeah.
the tools, the trucks, the methodologies, but they didn't. They kept the intelligence together,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
they kept on with the same brand.
Right. And as far as I know, I mean, the PC thing was a different distribution model, but as far as I know, that the brand of having the professional computer expert help you through the process of buying the machinery, installing the software, and staying current, et cetera, was maintained throughout, that their service was always pretty good throughout that whole period of time. So despite that little PC kind of episode, all of their other stuff, continued to evolve and become a company that is still very, very strong today. And you're absolutely right. They did not let themselves get forced out of business.
Yeah, so they
They-
backed the brand. They did not let it. They came up and they reinvented themselves again and again. They didn't say no when their roads were shut. They kept on looking at new ways of doing the same thing they'd done before.
exactly.
Um,
Exactly.
so totally contrary to that is in the automobile business when you've had a couple of the major companies literally shut down brands. Why? Well, Oldsmobile, for example, part of the General Motors conglomeration, Oldsmobile, Pontiac, GMC, Chevrolet, Cadillac. But Oldsmobile shut down in 2004. Well, why didn't they shut down something else? Why didn't they reinvent that brand? Was it a duplication? Was it one too many brand anyway? Um,
Yeah.
what was going on in that area? Because that's clearly a
Yeah.
decision by corporate to
That was an early, a very early attempt. Of course, General Motors was formed by several companies coming together to be able to do more mass production. And so they came together with their current models, and they chose to keep their own business. And as a result, they each had their own niche markets, and so they ended up having different markets for,
different dealers,
yeah,
different supply chains in
yeah.
some parts.
And so I remember those days well, and I'm not sure I'm exactly correct, but Oldsmobile said it was old at a time when, um, those of us who were buying those cars, and I'm in that age group, where it's like, no, I don't want an American car, especially not an Oldsmobile. And I might buy a Jeep, don't want a Chevy. Why? That's because we were going through a change, and it was from abundance and cheap, and you have to buy a new car every year or 2 or 3 or 4 years, and literally the cars were dead at 100,000 miles. You couldn't keep them running, and they rattled, et cetera, after 2 or 3 years. You kind of had to do that because the quality was bad. And we had Mercedes and other companies and Volvo come into the country and demonstrate to this younger group that, these are simpler, they're more straightforward, there's a little less plastic and maybe more wood, or just a different quality. And the Europeans changed the value, perception of customers my age. And if we could afford it, we ended up buying Volvos. And I went from a Chevy to a Nissan 240Z to Volvo for a family. I mean, that's kind of, and then at the same time, the Japanese and were hitting us on price. So they hit the value diamond based on higher perceived value because they lowered the price. Americans didn't do very much about it, while the high end of the market, the more status of the market was coming from Germany and Europe, and they got squeezed in between. they literally had their brands squeezed between two other brands. And they were very slow because they thought they knew everything. And it wasn't until a few people came along, and no, they did have a few of those things. I mean, uh, uh, Mustang was a big hit and continued to be. Stingray was a big hit and continued to be. So, I mean, there were some cars, but Cadillac, people laughed about Cadillac because Cadillac would fall apart in a few years. And if you could afford a Cadillac, you could afford a Mercedes-Benz. So what are you going to buy? You're going to buy a Mercedes-Benz that you'll keep for 10 years. Now you'll keep them for 20 years. Cadillac, no, you got to trade that off every couple of years because you're going to have new fins. You're going to have something design change. So I think we became wary. I read a book. It was really kind of depressing. That's where I first started getting interested in this subject, called The Hidden Persuaders. And that book was all about how mass advertising was affecting mass audiences, and they treated all of us in the United States as one marketplace. We all bought the same refrigerators. We all wanted exactly the same stoves. Therefore, you give them enough diversity in cars, which is more of a fashion item, and you handle the whole market. Everybody had to have a ranch house, and then it became a tri-level house. I mean, so everybody had the same thing. But when you had these baby boomers come along who were used to getting more of what they wanted than, say, their parents did, they decided they didn't want to be like everybody else. So you end up with Haight-Ashbury, JP. That's where that comes from. And so
Counterculture.
all these brands changed.
It is kind of funny, actually, in hearing some of the themes you've been talking about, that because I watched the History Channel series, The Men That Built America. Have you all seen that?
Mm-hmm.
And they talk a bit about the foundation of GM and how they chopped up those different brands to be basically sort of the complete life cycle of a person.
Yeah.
Like, you started out cost conscious with like a Buick or a Chevy, and then you worked your way up, and now you're like married with kids, and you've got like a professional job. That's when you make the jump to a Cadillac, and in a way they're kind of cannibalizing each other.
You
but
had to have a station wagon in between, JP. The station wagon was invented for exactly that. It's like, okay, now they've got 2 or 3 or 4 kids, and we can't fit them in the car anymore. So we got to have a station wagon. It's when they begin to go away that we get them into the Buick and the Cadillac. And you're right, they had that all figured out.
And I guess here's the problem about cannibalization. I mean, it becomes a little bit like sort of the egg and spoon competition at like a picnic. I mean, you've got to be able to make that successful conversion for that process to work. And if, as a fashion item, nothing's going to turn someone off a fashion item faster than low quality. Not only then, if that loss happens downstream at like the Chevy stage, then not only has Chevy lost a customer, then so has Buick and Cadillac down the line.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, the whole thing, like that whole brand situation is really kind of confused in a way. Like, they do impact each other. And
yeah.
I think it must make branding for that particular company, for General Motors, which also has its own cars, really complicated.
Well, it did. It made it complicated. There were dichotomies in the marketplace. There was competition among divisions. So as Chevy started off with like 2 models, and Ford had 1 for years and years, and finally they had a little bit bigger one. So, but by the time you get into the 40s and 50s, you're talking about a 4-door, a 2-door, fastback, those are your models. And now all of a sudden Chevy is growing out to 6 or 8, and Pontiac is growing out to 6 or 7 or 8 or 9 or 10. And sooner or later you end up, you end up with this situation where they're overlapping each other within the brand. They cause the confusion themselves.
And
Yeah, so
you
what you
know,
ended up with was, a couple of the lines had exceptionally similar products, similar sizes, similar capacities, similar markets they were aiming for. So in effect, they were kind of competing against themselves.
They were.
And so there was another thing that went on too over that time. I came in from outside America, so I was coming in from New Zealand in the 90s, and I realized it's interesting that all these European cars had fuel injection, Japanese cars had fuel injection, but in the 1990s, a lot of General Motors products still had carburation.
Right.
And for whatever reason, there was a resistance by the manufacturing arm in America to embrace some updated and new technology. They said, no, we've got 50% of the market where we can control the market. But what was happening, to your point, is people were buying Nissans and Mazdas, and they were fuel injected cars.
Yeah.
They were becoming more efficient, not just because they were made overseas, but they had adopted some new technologies. And there was I think, a move to resist doing that, at least for another year, maybe another two, to roll out the relationships we've got. And so that has changed. That doesn't exist. We're now in an international marketplace. In the 1990s, we weren't. If you were the dominant player in America, you were the dominant player, and you could, in some extent, control it. That clearly is not the case today.
They were the biggest advertisers.
Yeah.
They did control a lot of the media. And when we only had 3 TV stations and everybody watches television, it was pretty easy to buy up all of the spots.
So we actually have a
literally
more
kept little guys out.
Right. We actually have a more informed society today. So one of the problems is that, more informed people are going to make different decisions. They're probably going to make a decision that their peers mightn't make, but they're going to make it on data and metrics. So I think that's something that has happened. But back to the brand thing, if the brand is capable of changing with the times, then I think they will have and continue to have people who follow them.